Thanks for coming out. I'm not doing karaoke today, so for those of you who just left the room, you can come back in. My name is Adam Tratt. Thank you for having me. This is going to be an amazing, amazing day. It's got some great speakers. It's an honor to be Mike Fridgen's opening act. I'm like a shorter, pudgier version of him with less financing. Today I'm here to talk about storytelling for the win. And I want to start with a story embedded in a story in my talk about storytelling. So try to get your head around that. And it all starts with this shoebox. Not actually this shoebox, but a shoebox just like this. And a day in 2000 when I met with a guy named Richard Tate. I'm willing to bet a few of you know Richard or have heard him tell his story. And on that day, about 12 years ago, I met with him to hear his story about a weekend in the Hamptons. He and his wife went away to a cottage with another couple. And it was a rainy day, and they had burned through all of their VHS tapes. They had watched Weekend at Bernie's 1 through 4. And they were out of things to do. So one of them proposed a game of Scrabble. It was supposed to be a friendly game of Scrabble. Little did Richard and his wife know that the opposing couple are the kind of competitors who keep their Scrabble scores up on the refrigerator. And within about 10 minutes, it became clear that this other couple was just crushing Richard and his wife, especially Richard. And it left him feeling dejected and inadequate and feeling like a bad husband. So to cast his revenge, Richard decided after the game of Scrabble to pull out Trivial Pursuit, which is a game that he and his wife played all the time. And the exact opposite happened. They crushed the other couple. The other couple was left feeling dark and gloomy. And though there was a brief moment of victory for Richard and his wife, after the whole game-playing session, he came to the realization that in a social environment where you're trying to be entertained by a game, isn't it too bad that there isn't an experience that gives everyone this moment of contribution and value and sort of uplift that you're supposed to get from a fun experience. And so he's telling me this story, and it winds around to this realization, this moment of clarity that he had, which gave birth to this idea for a brand that would be all about creating games that would give people the opportunity to shine and feel really good about their contribution in a social setting, like when you're playing a game. So for those of you who've heard this story before, you know that you probably have figured out by now that what was in that shoebox was an incredibly crude version of the first version of Cranium. For those not familiar, Cranium went on to sell tens of millions of games, books, and toys in more than 36 markets around the world. The company won multiple Toy of the Year awards and other accolades, and was ultimately sold to Hasbro for millions and millions of dollars. So, the reason I started with that story is because I think it cuts to the core of why storytelling is so important for entrepreneurs. On that day, Richard had basically nothing to show me. What was inside the cardboard box was just more cardboard and a little bit of Play-Doh. And if he had started by opening the box and showing me the cardboard and the Play-Doh, the conversation might have been over in 3 minutes, because really it wasn't that impressive. What Richard embodies is the ultimate in entrepreneurial storytelling. He created myth, essentially, out of this story. And it was what propelled his cardboard box from that coffee table into every Target, every Walmart, every Starbucks, every Amazon in the whole wide world. So he ingrained in me a real appreciation for why entrepreneurs need to be storytellers. This morning, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to try to break down the key reasons for why storytelling is so important. I'll offer some tips on how to craft your story and also how to deliver your story. And then I'll try to weave some more stories into the talk. So the first reason why storytelling is so important is something that I see over and over again after 2 years in Techstars, where I'm surrounded by new companies that are coming up with new ideas and pitching their story over and over and over again. As entrepreneurs, we get so wrapped up in what we're doing that we forget our audience doesn't care as much as we do. And we're so eager and wrapped up and self-consumed that we forget that we have to make it interesting for the audience. Incidentally, if this is you right now and you're staring at your iPad, would you please go download haikudeck.com? Or download Haiku Deck from the App Store. The second is that stories make what you're working on real. I love this photo of the fighter jet coming out of a cloud. And it reminds me of really what seems like most of my personal entrepreneurial journey, which, metaphorically speaking, has been staring up into the sky at a vaporous mass that looks like a cloud and trying to convince other people that it's not a cloud, it's an F-18. You should give me money because that is an F-18. And in just a short time, a jet is going to come screaming out of it. And it's going to explode in awesomeness, like an F-18. Talking to potential partners, co-founders, and employees, you have to be the one staring at the cloud and convince people that it's an F-18. Next is that stories convey your passion. Over and over again, throughout my journey, what I've heard from investors, especially, is that they invest in teams, not ideas. And what makes a team awesome, what makes founders awesome, is their passion. The other day, I met a founder of a company for the first time, and they were telling me what they do. And as they were telling me, I was watching their body language, trying to be gender aspecific. I was watching their body language, and what I noticed is their eyes were not lit up. They weren't telling the story with energy. They weren't, frankly, excited enough about what they were doing. And I think that part of the reason is that she was sort of struggling to articulate what it is that he or she was working on without framing it in an anecdote or some other sort of story that would bring her passion for what she was working on to life. As we were talking, it became clear that there was some passion there, and she just wasn't doing a good enough job of showing it. So stories convey your passion, and that's critical if you're trying to raise money, if you're trying to recruit employees and get them to believe in your dream. Next is stories are memorable. There's lots of great science that's been, lots of great research that's been done by people smarter than me. If you haven't read the book Brain Rules by John Medina, I recommend it highly. His rule number 4 is that when you frame your idea in metaphor, when you frame your idea in a story, people are more likely to remember it. And if you think about today, as an example, part of the reason you're all here is to meet awesome people who are going to help you drive your business forward. And by the end of today, if you've done your job right, you will have met 10 to 25 people who can help you. So you're all walking out of here having heard 10 to 25 stories. You're probably going to get home and only remember a few of them. So I would encourage you to use a story to help make your idea, your business, more memorable to the people you meet today. So how do you develop a story? If you remember one thing from my talk today, it would be this. Start with why. It's not my idea. It's a guy named Simon Sinek. You may have seen his TED Talk. I think it's one of the most viewed TED Talks on the internet. And what he talks about is this paradigm called the golden circle. And he talks about how great leaders and great companies become great because they start with why it is they are doing what they do. Not what they're doing, not how they're doing it, but why. So again, if you remember one thing from today, it's this. Simon Sinek says, people don't buy what you do. People buy why you do it. And if you believe that the startup journey is all about convincing people to believe that the cloud is an F-18, you have to start with why. Next is focus. Focus on the insight, experience, or moment that drove you to the place you're in. For Richard Tate, it was that story I told you about the Hamptons. He had this formative moment. For us at Giant Thinkwell, we started out as a social game company. Our first product was a Facebook game that we did in partnership with Sir Mix-a-Lot. And really, to get from there all the way to iPad productivity apps, it's a pretty big jump. And for us, that formative moment, that experience, was that when our team started to implode after things stopped going really well for a little while, we were left without a designer. And as an entrepreneur, you can probably relate to the fact that we were still having to pitch. We were still trying to pivot and find customers and rehire and get our team back going again and set ourselves up so we could raise more money. For us, the formative experience was we lost our designer, we still needed pitch materials, and it was really, really hard and time-consuming for us to create great pitch materials that made us look like we were bigger and better than we felt at the moment. And so from that, we came up with this idea for an iPad app that would make it easy for anyone, regardless of their design skills, to create beautiful presentations. Haikudeck.com. Next is listen. And I think that what you'll find is that when you're telling your story over and over again, there are cues, there are signals that your audience will give you. And you can pick up on those, obviously, by asking questions and listening to their words. But listening with your eyes and seeing people's emotional reaction, their subconscious, the reaction that is driven by their subconscious that shows up in their eyes, in their smile, and in their body language is an important skill to hone as you develop your story. Your story is never done, can always be better, and you have to become an expert at iterating and refining your story for each audience that you're dealing with, whether it's customers, partners, or investors. So one of the things I learned from Brain Rules is that it's really, really hard to hold a person's attention for more than 9 minutes without telling a story. So it's story time. I wanted to talk about a little bit about our journey. As I mentioned, we started out doing social games, and when our first game didn't go well, there were a variety of reasons why we felt the need to pivot away from social games, celebrity-based social games. Not the least of which is that we didn't know enough people in Hollywood, and we didn't have deep enough pockets to be an interesting partner for folks in Hollywood that we needed to help us. So we embarked on this new idea to develop a social video platform that at first was called FlickMob. And FlickMob was a way to gather in a virtual room with people who shared your interest and watch YouTube videos together. So there was a fail video room, and there was a Duran Duran room, and you could gather your friends, snowboarding room, TED Talk room. You could gather your friends together and watch videos and chat with one another. At the same time that we did this, and this is about a year ago, there were a few other companies dabbling in this space. When we launched, it became almost immediately clear that we were not onto something. We had built a really cool site, and when we walked around the office at Founders Co-op and engaged with people, through hand-to-hand combat, hey, come check this out, we were getting great feedback throughout the development process. But when we tried to get the broad, greater internet audience to come all at once to our site and watch videos, it just wasn't working. We were generating a little bit of curiosity, but it was sort of like we had built this beautiful nightclub, and people were walking by at 8 in the morning on Monday, and saying, that looks kind of cool, and then they'd leave and never come back. So our pivot was, instead of trying to build our own audience, let's go and let's talk to other people who already have an audience and have video content, and let's get them to deploy this really cool new way of watching videos, because we believed that it would get people to watch videos for longer, stay on the site longer, increase ad revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So we went out and we talked to a wide range of content providers. There are people that had humor content, people who had news content, and we had great meetings. Everyone was telling us, yeah, this is really cool, this is interesting, we totally want to go in that direction. And it gave us the hope to keep moving forward. But then in the follow-up, we started to notice something that was really, really frustrating for us at first. It was frustrating because even though they had told us that they were really interested, they had told us that they wanted to move forward, and in some cases, they even told us that they wanted to pay us money for it. All of the signs that you look for when you follow lean methodology. When it came time to actually execute, to flip the switch, to turn it on, to execute the white label solution, they were not getting off their butts. Which brings me to my next point, and that is, and this gets back to listening with your eyes and your ears as you iterate on your story. Their inaction, even though it was frustrating at the time, was a really important signal for us. And I wish we had picked up on it sooner, because we would have saved about 2 months of runway if we had. But really what it came down to is that what we had created was interesting, but it wasn't interesting enough. There wasn't urgency on the part of our customers, and we were clearly going to die trying to get this thing off the ground. So inaction is a reaction. And listen to that and change your story if that's what you're seeing. Okay, 3 quick tips for storytelling, because I'm running out of time. We have found that in order to strike an emotional chord and to achieve resonance with an audience, any audience, you have to simplify your story. This is my mom, and although she's not having a technical problem right now, this is what she looks like when she's trying to do anything on her computer. She'd be upset if she knew that I had this picture on the screen, so sorry, Mom. Making your story simple is sort of I think it's the most critical thing that especially technical entrepreneurs forget. And this gets back to my first point. People aren't as interested in what you're doing as you are. You have to make it simple. You have to make your story compelling and simple to strike an emotional chord. Second is make it beautiful. Pictures say 1,000 words. In the case of a situation like this, or if you're in a coffee shop or in an elevator, it's great to have visuals to go along with it, and this is obviously very self-serving, because part of what Haiku Deck is about is making beautiful slides like this. If you don't have the opportunity to pull out a visual to illustrate your idea, you have to paint the picture with words. Your story has to be, it has to create that moment in the cottage in the Hamptons, or that moment, that dark moment in the office at Founders Co-op when my co-founder Kevin and I were looking at each other trying to figure out how to pivot FlickMob after the consumer site failed and after the white label thing clearly wasn't taking flight. Lastly, if it's not fun, you're not doing it right. Telling your story should be fun. This gets back to the story of the entrepreneur that I met whose eyes weren't lighting up when she was telling her own story. You all as entrepreneurs set the bar for how excited people are going to be about what you're doing. No one will ever be as excited about your business as you are. So if your eyes aren't lighting up when you're telling the story, you're doing it wrong. And that's important. That's really important. Okay, I have 1 minute left for a bonus story. Oof, I don't think I can pull it off. So implosions can make for a good story. So this gets to this sort of chapter 3 of Giant Think Well's history. As I mentioned, Kevin and I were sitting with each other trying to figure out, should we stay the path? Should we do what lean startup would tell us to do, which is take our FlickMob technology and keep pivoting down that path and try to find something? Or do we just give our money back to our investors? And there was a third option. 30 seconds. There was a third option, and that was to keep going on a completely different path. And that's what we did. We took door number 3. We built something that we were passionate about and way more excited about than the corner we had pivoted ourselves into with social video. So that's a very quick version of our story. That's my team, Mark Kamaka, Kevin Lenaway. They're the smart ones who built Haiku Deck, and I'm the guy who gets to stand up here and take all the credit for it. As it turns out, we're hiring. So if you're an entrepreneurial-minded developer, so that's it. You can learn more at haikudeck.com. We've been tweeting links to some of the things I referenced from the @HaikuDeck handle, and you can follow me at AdamTR, and if you want to email me or call me. So that's it. Thank you very much.